Hello, welcome to our latest Queen Elizabeth Scholarship presentation from the McMaster Health Forum at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. I'll provide you with a quick rundown of the McMaster Health Forum, the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Program, and the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Program here at the Forum. I will then turn it over to our scholar presenter who will talk about their experiences. The McMaster Health Forum aims to be the leading hub for improving health outcomes through collective problem solving. We harness information, convene stakeholders, and prepare action-oriented leaders to act as an agent of change by empowering stakeholders. The Canadian Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Scholarships, or QES for short, is managed through a unique partnership of Universities Canada, the Rita Hall Foundation, Community Foundations of Canada, and Canadian universities. This program is made possible with financial support from the Government of Canada, provincial governments, and the private sector. The purpose of the program is to activate a dynamic community of young global leaders to create lasting impacts both at home and abroad through cross-cultural exchanges encompassing international education, discovery and inquiry, and professional experiences. The McMaster Health Forum had a previous Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Program. We were very proud to have been selected as one of 20 Canadian institutions to host a second round of scholars. The new program ran from 2018 to the end of 2021, but was extended to the end of 2023. The focus of the McMaster Health Forum's current Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Program is strengthening health and social systems. Our scholars have contributed to strengthening health and social systems and have become part of our large and growing network of health and social system leaders. During our original Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Program, we hosted 14 incoming scholars, and we sent 3 outgoing scholars to work with our partners. We also had an additional 44 outgoing interns who traveled abroad to work with partners of the McMaster Health Forum. For our current Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Program on strengthening health and social systems, we have hosted 7 incoming scholars, and we have sent abroad 24 outgoing interns who have worked with our partners around the world. Our scholar presenter today is Daniela, who at the time of QES was a graduate student in the Master of Science in Global Health program at McMaster University with a specialization in implementing innovations on a global scale. Daniela's interests in healthcare research intersect with the complexities and barriers faced by newcomers and refugees into societies. During her internship, Daniela hoped to gain insight on how leading international and Australian research is synthesized and modified in response to the changing needs of policymakers and the national landscape. Daniela, over to you.
Hi everybody, my name is Daniela Gallardo and I am one of the 2023 QES interns who completed my internship experience with one of the McMaster Health Forum partners in Sydney, Australia. So I'll give a brief overview of the next 10 minutes or so and what I'll be discussing. I'll start off with giving an introduction to the Sax Institute, which is the McMaster Forum partner in Australia, and then I'll go into a little dive into the projects that I worked on in my time there, and then I'll move into some highlights from being in Australia and being in the country and what my experience was like. And then I will wrap it off with some thank yous, as well as leave my contact information for anyone who would like to get in touch and have any questions they would like answered about this experience. As I mentioned previously, the partner or hub that I completed my internship with is called the Sax Institute. The Sax Institute is a research network in Sydney, Australia, that houses many different programs, but all really working towards the aim of being able to provide evidence-based research and recommendations to have an impact in policy. So my specific department and my specific team that I worked with was one called SURE. SURE stands for the Secured Unified Research Environment, and I had never heard about what these kinds of research platforms were, but they're actually modeled after trusted research environments which are implemented in the United Kingdom, and they're used by the health departments and heavily promoted by the health departments as a way to conduct research. And so that's exactly what SURE is. So this is a remote tool that houses many different ongoing research projects within the Australian healthcare system. So it houses data from many different stakeholders, including the Australian Department of Health and Aging, Family Services, the tax department, as well as Australian universities and nonprofit organizations. And the thing that kind of makes SURE stand out is that the platform's ability is one of the only programs within the Sax Institute that is actually monetized. It is still a non-for-profit organization, but it is basically a service that is sold to research hubs or government stakeholders as a way to store and house their data in a very safe and secure manner. And it's actually an incentive for research stakeholders to put in their ethics applications that their data is being stored and accessed in SURE, because there needs to be assigned verifiers for a researcher to input data, so to put data into the system, as well as take it out. So any sets of data that are removed and put into a hard drive need to be verified and approved at each step along this process. And so within the SURE system, when I was working there were currently about 185 active workspaces. So this means that there were 185 active accounts or projects that were using the SURE system to house and to store their data. And one of the main incentivizers or one of the main draws towards using a system like SURE is that it's able to link data among many different partners for one single project. So, for example, if a study wants to requires data that needs to look at the pharmaceutical benefits. So what are the medications that a participant or a citizen is using at the time? It lets you connect those details to also, for example, morbidity statistics. So if a certain person, had a certain illness, it lets you toggle with the different marked data. So you could see when that person had this certain illness, what medications they were on, if that person ended up living with the disease for X amount of time. This linked system essentially lets researchers play around with those features to identify trends and identify markers and essentially move and find new areas of new connections and new patterns within a particular project. Another draw about SURE is that it also lets researchers and PIs track ethics applications. And this was quite particular to what my tasks were during my time, which I'll get into in a second. All right, so now that we're getting into the specific projects that I've worked on during my internship, I was already briefly mentioning about one of the draws of SURE being that it lets a single project that perhaps works with, 5 or 10 different partners, it lets this project centralize all the different ethics applications for that project. So the bigger the project, and especially if it was a project that involved partners in Melbourne and in Sydney or in the Northern Territories, it lets all those institutions collect the different ethics applications for each body and house them together. Of course, as you can imagine, as the system continues to grow, one of the things that also needs to be monitored and maintained is the is updating the status of these ethics agreements. And so the very first project that I worked on was actually going through the 185 workspaces that were being housed at the time and going through the individual files for each project and updating the validity period of a certain ethics application, and then going forward and inputting if an application was, if ethics was renewed or if it needed to be restated if there was a change in the project and the nature of the project. So this was an interesting project to work on because it really introduced me to the different regulatory bodies that are in Australia. It made me aware of, one, just how lengthy these ethics applications can be, and just how administrative and backlogged a project can get if, there's a change in staff, if there's a change in one of the research goals, or if a study is modified and ethics needs to be extended. But this is also what makes SURE a very reliable and very attractive system for stakeholders to use. So, for example, when I was working there, there were meetings being set up between the Australian tax department because they were looking to expand their partnership with the Sax Institute because they recognize the value of actually storing citizen data within the system. And so having that accountability factor was a very important feature of SURE that, continues to develop a partnership between the Sax and with the government. That was the first project that I worked on. The second project that I got a chance at completing was a foundational review of international best practices on data governance. So a very general theme throughout my placement at the Sax Institute was really delving into this world of data governance and a little bit of data sovereignty and what that means. And the very first project that I worked on really touched on this concept of governance because monitoring and keeping track of these ethics applications is a form of data governance, and making sure that every organization is being held accountable to what data they have access to and for what periods of time. And so this second project delved deeper into that concept. My team was specifically interested in knowing what were the current trends on secure system environments. So I mentioned this previously that, SURE, the concept of SURE is based on this original concept of a trusted research environment that's used heavily in the UK. But this is also used in Canada and in Canada as well. And so part of this review required doing research on current systems that are used in Canada and used in the United Kingdom. It involved understanding what the logic model is behind a secure system environment, what training exists on researchers particularly. So it was interesting for me to notice that training is not something that is as readily available as one would think, and not training on how to actually use the system itself, but training on what are data governance practices, on what is the standard, what is the standard of data usage and data handling at this level. And the third project that I worked on was a guideline commentary on Indigenous data sovereignty. This was quite an exciting project because this was something that I was encouraged to identify as a personal interest of mine. And, seeing as how mostly what I was working on had to do with data governance, there's quite a big crossover and it really overlaps with this concept of data sovereignty. So understanding what the values are. Data sovereignty, you can think of it as the pillars and the values that dictate how data is used, how it's handled, and how it's accessed. And the data governance component is, the actual steps or the actual quantifiable things that are at the practitioner level that govern this usage. So this was actually a project that I worked with the search team. So if you have the chance to listen to Anissa's presentation, I highly encourage you to do so, because she worked very closely with the Aboriginal research team. And I joined in towards the end of my internship on discussing what the concept of data sovereignty is when it comes to Aboriginal research, and developing principles as well as recommendations on how other organizations can implement data sovereignty practices into their own research and into their own collaborations. And this was a really exciting project, especially because around the time that the interns were there was currently discussions to actually create an Aboriginal Research Center. So it was quite exciting to know that the documents that I was working on are going to have a very real use in creating, those frameworks and those models for expanding into, a center like this in the future. Okay, so I think I have just wrapped up discussing the specific projects that I was working on during my time at the Sax Institute. And I, of course, can't end this presentation without giving due time talking about my experience in Australia itself. I think an opportunity like QES, it not only gave me the chance to work and contribute meaningful work to global health projects, but it also gave me the incredible opportunity to live in Sydney, Australia for 3 months and explore the country outside of our work hours. So my position at the Sax Institute was a hybrid position. Since the pandemic, they explained to us that their office culture switched to one that was hybrid. The Sax Institute was an incredible place to work. Everybody was super welcoming and friendly, and they were really excited to have interns for the first time after the pandemic. And so they were very organized and made sure that we had our desks ready before our arrival. They made sure that our team and all our members were introduced to us. And I know that my team specifically made really remarkable efforts to include me into their work culture, invite me into the wider staff meetings, but they even also made efforts to get to know me outside of the office as well, and so I really felt welcomed from the very beginning. And of course, it kind of goes without saying, but getting to live in Australia for 3 months was an amazing opportunity that I'll never forget. I was living actually with 2 other interns, Anissa and Aaron, so I encourage you to go to their presentations and hear about their experiences as well. But that was a fantastic opportunity to not only get to work at the office together, but also have that downtime after to be able to talk about our experiences and also get to explore the country together. And speaking of other interns, there was quite a big group of us that had placements in Sydney this year. There were 6 of us, and I think that's the most that has ever been sent to one location. And truly, my experience would not have been as great without the 6 of us there, because we were always excited to go explore a new part of the country or go explore a new neighborhood. And this really made me look forward to the time spent outside of the office for sure. I also was really lucky to work at an office like the Sax Institute, because they really did encourage us to get out of Sydney and explore as much as we could. Like I mentioned before, there's a hybrid work environment, so it was really conducive if we wanted to travel. And I think most of us were actually able to do our own individual trips. And so for myself specifically, I was actually able to visit family that I had in Brisbane who I'd never met before. And I think there's a picture of all of us gathered together, so that was a really special experience. I had a sibling. I had my brother actually come visit me, and we were able to travel to the Northern Territories and actually go to Uluru. And And I also can't even talk about the countless little weekend trips that we would take. Actually, one of our last weekends in Australia, one of Anissa's coworkers from her team actually was super generous and took us to see the Blue Mountains in Sydney. And I think there's a picture of that in this slide as well. And there's also a picture there of when my brother and I were traveling. We were able to go to the Great Barrier Reef, so up more towards the northern part of the country. And when we were in Sydney, people always assume like, oh, I was there during winter, but I can say that their winter is more like our spring, and honestly, even like some of our summer. I think the average temperature was maybe about 15 degrees, and I think the coldest it ever got was maybe in the dead of the night, it was 5. So I know for us, being from Canada, that's really, really child's play. So I don't feel like I sacrificed the summer weather really that much. And honestly, I would totally do it again, because getting to live in a country that is very similar to Canada, was such a great experience. It was such a welcoming country from the very beginning, and I can't talk about Sydney highly enough. And it's one of those places where if I ever have the chance to visit again, I will definitely jump on that. All right, so to sum up the end of this presentation, I would just like to end it off for some very well-needed thank yous. I am incredibly thankful for the Shore team for giving me a very, very concise and comprehensive training and crash course into what Shore was, as well as to the Sax Institute in general. And of course to the search team for being really receptive to working in a project alongside myself towards the end of my internship. And of course the McMaster Health Forum and the QES Scholarship for providing such an unforgettable and valuable work placement that I will definitely carry with me in the rest of my career as a researcher and in global health. Getting that international experience is so valuable as part of any educational experience, and it really does go a long way with whatever experience you want to tailor your career towards in the future. And with that being said, for any of you watching who are curious and who are thinking about this opportunity for this upcoming year, I highly, highly encourage you to apply. I know that when it was me this time last year, I was skeptical if I had the right background or if my qualifications measured up, and I can say from experience that you'll never know if you don't try and put your best foot forward. And that's why I'm fully making myself available to answer any questions about the application process that you might have. So I've listed my email and my LinkedIn information if you might be interested. And I guess with that being said, thank you so much for listening to this presentation. I hope that for those of you watching, you were able to get something valuable out of this. And once again, if you have any questions about this program, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be more than happy to get to know you and help you in any way that I can. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you.